Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In this part of the podcast, we're going to be talking about the Age of Sigmar reveals from the LVO 2025 community update thingamabob, aren't we, Phil?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
Indubitably. So yeah, me and Phil, as most of you probably are aware, we enjoy a bit of the old AOS. It's maybe not been as popular as GW would hope, although I don't really know what I base that on. It's just a vibe check kind of thing. I don't know if AOS 4 has been the white-hot release that we maybe hoped it was. I love it. I make no secret of it. I think it's a really good game. Phil, where's your heart at on the AOS?
I was very strong at it at the beginning, and I still think it's a good game. It's the way I would describe it is it's a better game than 40k, but I'm more in love with the 40k setting, and that's always my struggle with Age of Sigmar, whereas the setting isn't quite as gripping, even though the army ranges are predominantly better, I would say, than the 40k army ranges. But yeah, it's just hard to love or get behind the AOS army sometimes, and the models are all beautiful, but I quite often love the desire to convert and kit bash miniatures. And it just seems a lot harder to do that in AOS in my mind. I can't get that little nugget of inspiration to want to convert something, especially when the models are just gorgeous to begin with, whereas I feel like 40k is much more kit bash friendly.
Yeah, 40k is a lot more evocative, isn't it? It's a much vaster but much better established universe with a lot of years of history. And I think the thing is that, you can't ignore the incredible writers and contributors who kind of created and fleshed it out, from the early kind of works of Rick Priestley to everything that's kind of come over the years since. And I think, not to just credit Rick Priestley with it initially, although he is broadly considered to be one of the kind of key creators of the kind of key fluff, as it were. But yeah, I think that's the thing. It's 40k is this really rich, incredible universe, and there's so many now periods of time that you can dive into. I've seen people get super excited about, representing the tyrannic warfare between Ultramarines and Tyranids across Macragge and the whole kind of Ultramar segment of the universe. I've seen people get super invested in the idea of the Eight and the Farsight Enclaves and that whole kind of concept. And, that's really just the tip of many, many icebergs that make up the sheer volume of 40k, whereas in AOS, as someone who's been playing it now consistently for 2 years and has played majoritively orcs during that time, I don't really know much of anything about the faction from a fluff perspective, other than they, fly around the mortal realms projected by their angry magic, appearing in places and getting stuck in and brawling. So yeah, it's very it doesn't sort of it's weird. It feels like as a setting, it doesn't have that same kind of magic, and maybe that is one of the barriers to entry, because it sure as heck isn't the miniatures, as we're going to see when we go into the Barrow Kingdoms, the Soulblight Gravelords that are on display in this article. Because I think, to say it up front, these are some, yet again, stunning miniatures for the game of Age of Sigmar. It's been a while since AOS has put out miniatures that I've not looked at and thought, flipping heck, they're incredible. I actually really can't honestly remember when the last time an underwhelming kind of core range of AOS came along.
Yeah, I mean, I could pick some, but they're all old.
Yeah, but even at their time, if you look at Blades of Khorne, which definitely look dated, or Fire Slayers,
they're the two I was thinking of.
They're very early things, and they still have some flavour to them. I think, probably Fire Slayers are on balance are probably the weakest range overall, although I think Blades of Khorne have definitely got some old jank in there. But again, a lot of the Blades of Khorne stuff was Warhammer End Times. I mean, again, a lot of those units actually started out during the End Time period and then were moved into AOS with Blades of Khorne. So again, it's different, right? I think that's the thing. I think ever since maybe Fire Slayers, I can't really think of anything that's been a bit of a miss. Other than, obviously, in my opinion, actually, truth be told, the Stormcast don't work for me at all. So there you go. The Stormcast are the most boring and uninteresting thing in AOS.
Yeah, I mean, Idenef Deepkin, I'm not a huge fan of. But there are some really gorgeous sculpts in there, but I think the overall setting and aesthetic of them is just a bit odd to me.
Oh, I love the IDNF. They're actually one of the few fluff-related things in AOS that I think is super interesting. Like the idea that they are the sons or the the offspring, the faction made in the image of Teclis, and the fact that Teclis hates them and has discarded them basically. And he's like, no, I'm going to go hang out with my brother's kids. They're cooler than you. Meh. It's like, I actually really like IDNF Deepkin. I think they're one of the stronger ranges in terms of aesthetic, but I also think they've got a really fun.
It's a very
story.
unique aesthetic, and what I like about a lot of especially some of the earlier AOS ranges, is they sort of took elements from a fantasy range. The Nighthaunt's a classic one. They took like the Banshee model and the Grimghast Reaper, I think he was called, and they took those aesthetics and gone, well, let's just turn that into an entire faction. And they've taken dwarves, for example, and gone, let's just have them in flying ships, and they've made the Caradron Overlords. I've liked that they've taken those aesthetics and sort of completely flipped the switch on what you expect that race or faction to be like, and they've given you something very unique. I think now we're getting to a stage where they're almost going back in reverse, and they're taking a classic range of miniatures and reimagining them slightly with an AOS aesthetic, but still feeling very much Warhammer Fantasy. I think Cities of Sigmar did quite a good job with that. The Soulblight Gravelords that we've now seen look very sort of fantasy-esque with this Death Rattle range, so I think that will be really interesting to look through. And there's been a bunch where they've sort of I think Soulblight Gravelords just in general just look phenomenal, but they haven't really reimagined them as a brand new army. They've just sort of gone back to their roots and given you a classic range of minis that really represent that archetype.
Yeah, but they've dialed it all up, and I think that's the really incredible thing. We were talking about it when we were going through some of the 40k stuff and the on-foot hero things, and I think that's the thing with this is, like, in a way, revisiting and giving sculpts a bit more of a kind of glow-up, as it were, is a really cool thing and something I really love to see, and I think this, to me, represents a really good series of improvements, and yeah, I'm definitely in favour of this kind of thing. What was I going to say? I think overall, the general state of AOS is definitely an interesting topic for another time, and I think we'll probably put that into a segment in the future, talking about speculating kind of where we feel like AOS is at and where it may have gone wrong. I think this year is going to be really interesting for AOS, and I think a lot of that will become apparent as we go through this article, and I'm really excited to talk about it, because I genuinely, all of the things we've said so far are entirely valid and the points are valid, but I genuinely believe that AOS is a great game and needs to be played. I think, I think it's a incredibly beautiful range of miniatures on the whole. It's genuinely a lot more cost effective to get into. Like, almost always 40k is, I don't know what the scale is really, but I think maybe that's an experiment as well that we could add into it, is like how much is like theoretically the cheapest AOS army versus the cheapest 40k army that you could kind of conceive, and then conversely, what's the most expensive AOS army look like? And I think probably at the cheaper end, AOS maybe isn't necessarily meaningfully cheaper than the cheapest 40k, but I would definitely say at the more expensive end of the scale, I think that's where AOS kind of potentially, kind of cheapens out in the sense of if you're building like a meaningful army. I'm not talking about if you went, I know I'm going to buy loads of this 100-point unit that I get like that costs like 40 quid for 100 points or whatever. I'm sure there are things you could do to make it more expensive necessarily, but anyway, it's a conversation for another time.
No, it's fair. I was going to say, I'll just add on to that because we might have talked about it in the outro, but the points thing is a big thing. So me and Sean doing the doubles, obviously Dan, you'll be there with Richard this weekend that we're playing up at Warhammer World, and we were talking about trying to refine our lists, and I was looking through Sean's Soulblight Gravelords army, and he had like 60 points spare. So I was like, oh, what's in his army that he could fit into that? Nothing is the answer. There's almost nothing under 100 points. I think the cheapest is literally like 100 points, maybe 90 or something like that. Every unit is very expensive. Nighthaunt, for example, the cheapest is a 4-man unit, and that's 80 points, I want to say. So it's like the points differential between that and 40k, where you can get a 10-man guard squad for like 45 points or something, is ridiculous, which is why I think the scale of AOS maybe works a bit better, and the model count does feel a lot lower, because just units are so much more expensive, almost like double basically for a lot of stuff. So yeah, it is an interesting point of comparison. I think I also did point up the Death Rattle box that you're getting, because it's, yeah, I don't.
How much is it?
Yeah, let me just remove the White King, because I think I added on some extra units to be like, oh, how much would it actually come to?
I mean, I was going to say though, in the case of like, I know obviously you're limited by the miniatures that you have in your collection, or rather, Sean has in his collection in this instance, because I know he's gone for Prince Varadar and 10 Blood Knights, right?
Yes, yeah.
Because I mean, in theory, obviously Prince Virodray or whatever he is fine. But if you just took like 5 Blood Knights, then obviously what happens there is that you then have 290 points, and at that point you could be starting to look at units in that kind of 100 to sort of 140 range, or potentially like one unit for like 100, another like 180. So for example, you could have taken Blood Knights, a unit of Black Knights, and then a unit of Death Rattle Skeletons, and that would have been fine, and you would have been only like 20 points off. So I think that's the really interesting thing about the points in AOS is it makes you actually need to think about what you're taking and come up with those priorities and actually rejig things, because you can't just kind of, it's not like 40k where you just put in all the stuff you want and then you can kind of perfectly piecemeal stuff around it. AOS, it's one of those things where it's like, you can lean into the super elite stuff, but it is quite inefficient. But you're essentially weighing up the pros and cons of that, really, and I quite like that.
Yeah,
in terms of how
that's
that
true.
works.
In terms of the box, it looks like, so you get a right on. Is it right? Or was it Wraith? Right, yeah, White Lord. White King on Skeletal Steed. You get some horses, which I'm putting down as Black Knights, and then you.
Yeah, they're definitely going to be more than your standard Black Knights, though, I feel like, because they seem quite different.
They might be something else.
But
I think they've sort of said you can run your Black Knights as whatever this the Barrow Guards, whatever they're going to be called, which we can double check. And then there's 2 units, and I've put one down as Death Rattle Skeletons, which are the cheap ones, and 1 unit down as the Grave Guard, which they've said.
But they're both Grave Guards.
They're both Grave Guard. Okay, that makes it even better. Okay, I wasn't entirely sure if they were 2 of the same, because there are.
No, it's 2 units of Barrow Guard, 1 unit of the Barrow Horses, and the new Barrow Lord on Mount.
So that comes to 670 points. That's a lot of points, in my opinion, for a box set. And I think we talked about the Krieg one was barely 400. I think not even that.
Well, it was 310.
Yeah, I knew it was closer to 3 something, but yeah, not even 400 then. So that's double your points for probably the same price in terms of how much the box is going to cost. So if you were looking at purely from a sort of points perspective, this is not just double the value; it's probably quadruple the value, because you'll need twice as many models in a guard army or a 40k army than in an AOS army. So yeah, I think a lot more value for money from this.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is the thing, right? You could still lean into, like, you could still add a unit of Blood Knights to that, which at the moment are like 230. You can look at things like the various big dragon minis. There's lots of stuff that you can add into it. But anyway, look, by the by, yeah, I love the box set. It's a great selection of minis for an already great range. I think Soulblight Gravelords occupy this very interesting space where they're kind of this kind of homogenous group of different stuff.
Well, a lot of factions are like that, though. Like Gloomspite gets made up of several different factions. Orc War clans have got your 2 divisions. Not all of them are like Nighthaunt, for example, just are Nighthaunt. There's no real sub-factions within that in terms of what the model ranges are. And I do quite like it. What they're doing is that they are giving you sort of mini armies within a wider army part of me would love it if
Yeah.
they did just flesh them all out and then give them their own battle tome and be a standalone force. But I sort of understand that they want this sort of cross synergy. It's like, yeah, you can have a mix and match of different things, because you might want a vampire lord leading an army of death rattle skeletons, even though thematically maybe they wouldn't, and vampires would be having other things instead.
Yeah. I do think it's really interesting with the way these ranges are built up as well, though, and I think that's the thing. Soulblight Gravelords got a lot of love in the last edition. A lot of that came from the Cursed City bump that they kind of
that
enjoyed.
was phenomenal range.
Yeah. So they really got a lot of love in that. But yeah, we're now getting, even more. And it's not just skeletons they're getting, although let's just talk about these skeleton minis. So the first one out the gate is the White King on Skeleton Steed. Intriguingly, Phil, and I know you know this already, they did a White King on Steed mini last year, or rather 2023.
Yeah, 2023. It's like 2 years old, basically, fresh out the box. So barely time to gather any dust in anyone's cupboards, and it's already announced it's effectively just being replaced. And now this one is a multi-part kit and has 2 builds. But it's odd that they're replacing it such a new kit. And the old one, I mean, I know Richie, I'm calling him out here, said it was trash. I actually think it looks really good. I think, yes, it's not got as nice a scenic base. The pose is a bit static, although weirdly the pose is quite similar to the guy in this one. But I think the horse, while it hasn't got the sort of evocative flourishes of the windswept tatters that this one has, it's the armor on it is just phenomenal. And I would say the horse in the other one is better, but the rider on this one's cooler. But if you want a dude with a lance, that other mini is good. And if you want a death rattle army, and it's something that I'm going to admit now has been rattling, to excuse a pun, around in my brain, it makes me go, well, if I did want to do this, I should definitely get that other model. Just so it's an alternative sculpt to have in my back pocket, even if I might use this one as well. Like I think that one's great. This one's great as well.
I mean, that one is great. This one, to me, it can only be better because of like the overall kind of presentation of it. I think the kind of decorative base, the motion of the actual figure, the way that it's sort of like, because I kind of like, and I know it's like a bit sort of, maybe I'm overreaching, but it's that thing, isn't it, where like the skeletal form is this kind of weightless dead thing, and as a result nothing really kind of flows from it. And I like the fact that it kind of stands in this very kind of rigid kind of pose, while the actual motion comes from all of the fabrics, and there's a sense of like that tattiness and that sort of like decaying decrepitness to these materials, like they're all kind of withering away, and there's that kind of entropy to it that really kind of works in a really amazing way. And I love the way they paint the armor, but it just sort of speaks of this kind of like old, long dead heroic thing that is now brought back to unlife in this really horrific kind of way. And there's a certain there's something really quite haunting about it. I think whether the fact it stands over the graveyard or whether it's just the overall kind of scale of it, I love it, man. Like this is a damn near perfect miniature for wargaming, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, whatever it may be. It's truly stunning. I think it's an absolute work of art. And I'll be honest with you, a fantastic alternate sculpt if anyone's looking for a cool alternative for a Lord Solar.
I could definitely take elements of it. Here's the thing, you could almost take the horse and remove the legs, swap them out for like the weird robotic legs that the Solar one's got if you really want to, or just paint these up to be metal, and then just change the person on top a little bit. You hit everything on the head in terms of like the pose, the stillness of it. It gives me vibes of like the villain pursuing someone across the countryside in a movie, and they just turn around and they see him in the distance and he's not moving at all. He's just like silently, stilly watching them. as they then go, oh god, and then they sort of run off. But the fact they've got the motion in the fabric brings it to life, whereas it feels like he's just not really moving. Looks phenomenal.
Yeah, it's stunning. And then, when you look at the sort of profile images of it, the detailing in like the armor, the shield, all of those really kind of Baroque elements. I even love the fact that he's got this kind of severed head of a king on his saddle, which is, really, really awesome. And then, you go to the alternate variant of the figure. Again, more of a kind of forward-facing pose. This is definitely, to me, the second of the poses that they offer in the article is the weaker of the two.
This is meant to be the more heroic one, because this is the White Lord.
Well, yeah, I don't think it kind of carries the same kind of presence. But I think, again, it could just be the angle of the photography and all the rest of it. I mean, again, love the paint job. I love that kind of
lots of verdigris.
Oxidizing. Yeah, verdigris, that's the term. It's well nice. Yeah, well done, whoever made that. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, this one's got more of a Lord Solar vibe to him, with the sort of the crested plume and the sort of a pose with the sword and stuff like that. They're both cool. I don't know if I think out of the two, I'd prefer the first one. I think that's just much more interesting. But again, that might be the position of the, how the photographs have been taken, and when you see it in 3D, I might change my mind. But yeah, they're both good and they're both strong, and the fact that it's a multi-part kit that can do these two very different looking poses, I assume. Just trying to think how similar is the horse? Is it just a different head, I guess? Because I think the legs are in the same poses.
No, I actually don't think they. Oh no, they are.
I think it's just the kind of crest armor on the horse's head, I think, is the main difference. I think they've been quite clever about it as well. Like, they've given you very strong photograph for the first one, and then they've shown the second model from the other side, so you can't get a complete like-for-like comparison where you would maybe notice that the horse is the same for a lot of the elements of it. So, yeah, very cleverly done. But it looks good as well.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. And I was going to say, I think it's hard to believe, and I understand why, because Emperor's Children are so freaking cool conceptually, and I love them in terms of what they represent. So I completely understand why people are excited to collect Emperor's Children. But if you were thinking about this stuff just objectively based on miniatures, how you could look at this and look at Noise Marines and go, I'm going to buy some Noise Marines. It's just like, this is phenomenal. And like, and again, I would strongly suggest to anyone, if you are resisting the temptation because you don't think you're going to like Age of Sigmar because of double turns and all this nonsense, genuinely give it a try. It's so good. It's a game worth playing, and when you can have miniatures like that, I just don't understand why you don't give it a try.
This is a really interesting thing where it's like, I wasn't ever considering doing a Soulblight Gravelords army. I love vampires and I love the aesthetic and I love the old fantasy range, and I've converted up some minis for more time as an undead warband. So I do have, and I've obviously got Nighthaunt, so I've got a inherent love for the Death faction as a whole, I think. And I love a lot of the older minis, and the Underworld skeleton minis have always been really great. The Sepulchral Guard, which was the very first skeleton Underworld's warband I did, I had that box and I really like that one. And then these are, and I obviously loved the Curse City stuff as well. But I was never like, oh yeah, I've got to do a Death army. I've got to do a Soulblight Gravelords army. And then this comes out, and it genuinely makes me want to buy the box, even though I've got tons of other projects on my hand. Like, this is what a slam dunk is for Games Workshop, where you don't even know you want the minis until you see them, and then you go, oh, well, I just need to do an army of this now. Like, that is an ultimate win for Games Workshop. And as you said, Emperor's Children did not do that whatsoever, and I don't think would do it for most people. It was... I never realised I loved Emperor's Children until now, because these minis are just phenomenal. Instead, it's like an easy pass. Thanks. My wallet has been saved.
Yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? I think, to me at the moment, the Death faction has some very strong ranges in it now. I think with this change here to these guys. Like, I have no idea why, and I quite liked the Bone Reapers first time round, but now with this, I have no idea how, if you want to do a Skelly army,
Yes.
you're going, ooh, the Bone Reapers are for me, not this. It's like, you know,
it's interesting.
yeah.
So, yeah, as we talked about before, Bone Reapers is basically taking the concept of skeletons from fantasy, dialing it up to 11, and giving us a brand new faction with it. And then this is going back to the classic fantasy skeletons. So it's odd that you now have effectively 2 skeleton factions that you can pick, but one is just wildly different from the other. And for the most part, the Aussie Art Bone Reapers, I just don't like most of the minis. Some of them, though, are really lovely. I like the mad sort of catapult with the little legs. And I like like the Bone Collector, I think it is, like the big monster with the weird fists. The Harvester, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, love that model. But then a lot of the generic troops and stuff I don't like. But, you know, these ones I love. But almost if they were just, you know, the kind of classic Tomb King style, like naked skeletons with no armor on as well, I would also love. Because because it would just be a lot easier to paint. I think would be its biggest bonus. But yeah, these models really do a good job of just making you want to collect this army now.
Yeah, we'll look at the other minis next, but just to say, I think, the big difference, I think, with this range and what they've done to this particular burst of Soulblight Gravelords is that they've really leaned into those kind of like grim horror type aesthetics. They're not cartoony. I think that's the problem with the Bone Reapers and even some of the older kind of skellies and other things. I think there was a kind of cartooniness to them, a sort of comicalness to them that this doesn't
even
really
so, for example, the zombies from Cursed City, where they've got like the graves stuck to them because they've just come out of the ground, did come across quite cartoony, although predominantly the rest of the range didn't do that, so I think they did it quite well. And yeah, these guys look great. They look very in line with the last Death Rattle, was it an Underworld's War? Yeah, I want to say it was an Underworld's Warband that looked basically the upgraded version of the sort of standard skeletons, the Graveyard guys, which these guys are now replacing. And I've seen loads of people online going, I want to get hold of those Underworld's Warbands because they now fit the aesthetic of the rest of the army, so they'd be great just alternate sculpts. But they're just completely sold out everywhere, and they're like ridiculous money. So, you know, maybe they're reappear at some point.
GW will bring them back at some point, maybe, when they need to, you know, fill up the bank account again. Right, next along is the replacement for the Grave Guard, the Barrow Guard. Look, I mean, you've heard us wax lyrical about the Lords. The same is true of these. I think they are pretty on point. I don't think there's anything that I can find fault with on these. My only weird wibbly complaint, and I think it works still from a general kind of creative perspective for what these are, but I would say that the only thing that's odd to me, and maybe this is on purpose, but the only thing that's odd to me is the armour seems like it's actually fashioned for the skeletal kind of frame, as in like the limbs and like the greaves and the vambraces and all the kind of armour is very slender. And I understand that obviously, you know, there are skeletons inside of it, but I always kind of assert that these are suits of armor that were made for, you know, big, chunky human warriors that are now being kind of brought back into life by, you know, dark magic and stuff, and there's skeletons inside, but there's a bit more, you know, the armor still kind of leans into that sort of chunkier aesthetic, but that isn't the case here. They are quite sort of slender, but again, possibly in the world of AOS, they're going, no, we're fashioning armor specifically for these guys because this is what we do now. It's not just a bunch of undead soldiers brought back to life. It's actually a purpose-built force of skeleton warriors that have been, chosen for their combat capabilities and so on. But otherwise, I mean, genuinely, it's a really minor quibble. Because overall, I think these things are just absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily mind that as a quibble. It's one, I assume it just makes them look a bit more like true scale and like kind of correctly proportioned.
Yeah.
They do have the sort of the cloak, the black cloth underneath, which you could say is bulking the bones out a little bit. And actually, it does a very clever thing of hiding a lot of the bones. So you predominantly have just armor and cloth to paint, and not like loads of bones to paint, but also not a lot of like weak like leg joints where it's just a kneecap and nothing else. So actually having the cloth sort of strengthens the model as a whole, so it feels like they'd be quite robust, which looks like it would be a lot more suitable for like playing figures. Whereas, you know, one of my greatest concerns or nitpicks about the Nighthaunt is they are just so fragile to both, as you're building and painting them, you're constantly breaking bits off them, and when you're playing with them, they're just constantly like getting stuck to each other because they've got so many wispy bits to them. They're just sort of like hooking onto each other constantly. So having an army that's a bit more robust would be a great benefit, I think, and these don't feel fragile.
Yeah, you can't even drop laptops on Nighthaunt.
No, I know. I mean, imagine doing something like that. Imagine doing that.
What kind of monster?
Who would do that, Dan? Who would do it?
Who would do it? I don't know.
The one thing I really like about it is so the banner guy and the tattered banner looks fantastic, and I saw that and I was like, I'm going to take that banner and put it on my Thunder Warriors because they love a tatty banner. So that is a great bit of kit bashing that I'm going to use for those guys at some point.
It will be yours.
It will be one day. I guess my only concern, not only concern, my only complaint, and it's literally nothing to do with the models, it's the Games Workshop's weird obsession about giving you a replacement unit for something that already exists and just giving it a different name. So it's just odd that these aren't called Graveguard and they've called them Barrow Guard instead, even though it's replacing the old Graveguard minis, and I guess we'll replace them in the Battle Tome in terms of like their data sheet and stuff. It's just an odd choice, unless it's a thematic one that's done deliberately.
Well, I've assumed they're going to continue to be called Graveguard when they continue to support them in Old World. So it's
okay, that's a fair point. Yeah, and I didn't know if it was more a sort of weird legal IP thing where Games Workshop just loves to create more unique sounding names, because Graveguard is sort of generic that other companies might use it because it's, you know, not copyrightable, for example.
It's definitely true that they definitely enjoy that kind of IP stuff, but I think it's more to do with the Old World dynamics in this case.
True, that's fair.
Next we have the Barrow Knights, not the Black Knights anymore, the Barrow Knights. Again, phenomenal. Like there's nothing really more to say from my side of things other than to reassert that these are dead pretty. I'm a fan. I think, you know, again, just really beautiful. What I like is that there's a real kind of... they've chosen to go with a more kind of, again, more sort of slow motion pose. It looks more like these horses are almost kind of like...
trotting along, aren't they?
Yeah. There's kind of like a kind of brutal inevitability to them that's sort of quite compelling, I think. And... the musician with the elaborate horn is, you know, really beautiful. The banner, again, phenomenal. Again, the old tatty banner is, just really great. It's a beautiful unit that really advances or evolves the concept of what these were before, but does so in a really interesting way. And again, I think it's just a great addition to the range. So really love it. I mean, what's your vibe on it?
I don't think they're quite as strong. I do like them, and it's both a criticism and something I love, but I think the horses look a bit silly. They're a bit derpy slightly. They just remind me of the old fantasy horses where they were literally just skeletons, and I think that is in part just because they're not hiding the skeletal structure of the horse under armor like they have done with the hero. They're sort of showing them off, and it just looks very odd. And again, it might be because they're not in a dynamic pose. They're sort of in that slow plodding pose. So on one hand, I can acknowledge that it looks a bit odd and silly, but at the same time, it tugs on the nostalgia that I have for the old army of fantasy. And actually, I've always loved those kind of classic skeletons that aren't wearing any armor at all, very like Ray Harryhausen style. So actually, I kind of love it at the same time as acknowledging it looks a bit odd and people might not like it. But the guys on top, I think, look awesome. I love the equipment, like the musician and the banner guy, phenomenal. I think they're very cool. And as we mentioned, there's the current existing White King or White Lord on horse has the lance, so he would go in really well with these guys. If you wanted to run him still rather than wait for the newer kit. No, these are cool. I think they're very good.
No, I love them. I genuinely, I agree with you. They're not the strongest of the three things, but they are. Yeah, I still think they hold up. We have the limited edition cover artwork, which is uniquely interesting in so much as I would say that the AOS limited edition covers so far, of which there has only really been, and I mean from like box sets, they've only done 2 box sets in 4th edition. They've done Gloomspite, and now they're doing these guys. I think both of them are really strong, but this one isn't as strong as what they did with the Gloomspite. I really loved the simple kind of clean black with the graphic image of the moon, or the sun rather.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember now. Yeah,
really, really awesome. This, though, it's an entirely original piece of artwork that they've created, obviously, for this particular box set. The gold trim and it looks gorgeous. It's a very nice looking cover and a great piece of art. I'm a big fan of that. I think the Stormcast Eternal cover really underwhelmed me. The Auric War Clans cover didn't blow me away either, but I'd say for the most part the AOS front covers or Codex artwork or Battle Tome artwork is really strong on the whole. I think the Skaven one looks really good. I think this looks really good. I can't remember what the Gloomspite Git one that isn't in the super duper box looks like, but whatever the case. Maybe they've not released an image of that yet, but
because it's not
I know there's
yet,
also,
so might be we've not seen it.
I know further down in this article there's the generic cover as well for Soulblight Gravelords. That is really cool as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, that's the contents of that box set. And on the topic of generic Soulblight Gravelords, it wasn't enough to give us a new range of skeletons. They went, you know what? We also need to give you a new sculpt for probably one of the coolest hero miniatures that already existed. Like, I think most of us can universally agree that the Zombie Dragon and the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, when it came into existence, was pretty incredible. But, I mean, the way that they have improved this miniature, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, how the hell have they made this thing even cooler? Like, it is... it's amazing, man. Like, what a... I don't know what to say other than I'm in awe. I think, the scale of this miniature is going to be absolutely incredible. But the sculpt, the pose... And again, like, we're not really even sort of seeing this in 3 dimensions at this point, right? Like, we're kind of still just getting that kind of face-on visual of it in all of the imagery. But you can tell there's so much, like, dynamic movement and incredible kind of posing, and the details are just immense. Like, this is... Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm looking for excuses not to pick up one of these. And when they confirmed that you could take a zombie dragon in like other factions as like a regiment of renown, I was like, if they let me take that in like either of my armies, either my Skaven or my Auric War Clans, I might be tempted.
No, they said it was death only.
Yeah, no, I know, but one day maybe Phil.
Yeah,
one day maybe.
Yeah, is it Prince Vaudry? I don't know how it's pronounced.
Yeah, Prince. Yeah, we just tried to pronounce it earlier when I was saying it in the case of Sean's army. Like Prince Vaudry or something like that.
Phenomenal. Mini. It's great. It's interesting because obviously, so our good friend Danvers, RFW_Danvers, I want to say. He did he's got 2 accounts, but that's his 40k one. But he did a phenomenal conversion of this using the Stormcast Dragon, and it's literally phenomenal. And it's basically, I didn't think that could be topped, but this is very close to that, if not actually doing it. It's a phenomenal sculpt. Looks really good. The posing of it is really great. I love the fact that actually the wings are sort of pointed down and he's climbing over stuff. I feel like they've done that with another sort of dragon mini, or one of the maybe the giant griff
they did it
monsters.
with...
Like the Stormcast Executioner.
Yeah,
It's like a little
the Lord Relector geezer on Stormcast
with
dragon
the cute
thing
little,
has kind of got that weird...
like almost like a crow monster with a little hood on him, where it's like climbing over. And the fact the wings are going down and they're not sort of upwards actually gives it a great silhouette, and also makes the model just feel really robust and solid, as opposed to quite fragilely posed on a tiny bit of rock. For example, I think the only thing that they haven't necessarily, I don't know if they have confirmed or not, but it sounds like the generic the generic vampire lord on zombie dragon might be going, and that you're just getting a zombie dragon or the named character on zombie dragon, based on I think the live stream. So that'll be interesting to see if that sort of middle data sheet where you can have a generic vampire lord goes or not, which would be a shame.
That would suck.
Which would be a shame.
Yeah.
But
I
could see them giving you the two options. And, I've always sort of complained about Nighthawk never having, like, a big monster. And the fact that technically I could just take the zombie dragon now for that army is very tempting. And it's just a phenomenal, gorgeous image. It's very cool.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing, mate. Like, it's, like, again, just, so good. And here it is in its regular kind of zombie dragon form. Again, actually really interesting when you see it without the rider and how it kind of shows off more of the kind of tattered, kind of withered details of the sculpt. It is phenomenal. It's super nice. And I think, again, there's all these like narratives about the rarity of these particular dragons and how they've been sort of hunted down and killed off by the more kind of pure, loyal, order-based dragons of the Stormcast Eternals. Personally, I really don't like the dragon sculpts for the Stormcast Eternals. The only dragon sculpts I particularly enjoyed for Stormcast were the really old ones, like the Star Drake or whatever it was called, the really ridiculous big one that they did back in the day. They're new ones that they did. I dislike all of them, but then I think that's just linked to my disliking of Stormcast in the general sense. But again, it is one of those things where you look at it, because I know people kind of really enjoyed, is it Krondus or whatever he's called, like the new, and people were like, oh, he looks amazing. I was like, oh, God, it looks awful. So there you go. Maybe I am not loving all things AOS in some regards, but like this, it's like, this is special. This is a very, very significantly cool
it's a great
release.
glow up. The old model, I think, hasn't aged that great. It's still, I guess, when it came out.
Oh, I disagree. I think it's amazing still, but like, I get that a lot of that is now nostalgia, right? Like, but this is superior in every tangible way. Really love it. And then last things last, we have a new Vampire Lord on a Nightmare Steed, which again, not loving the hair, I can't lie.
I love it.
I don't know, it's a bit
it's
too
very dynamic. They've done that on a lot of their sculpts, like the Warhammer, no, not the Warhammer Plus one. Some of the limited edition ones that they've done for vampires. They've got either hair turning into bats, for example, quite often.
Yeah, that was all right, but like this weird kind of like stick hair is just like, no. But you can have a bold option, which if I was to do this,
he looks quite, he looks particularly scary and menacing with the bald-headed version, and the axe, oh yeah. The axe and the sword are both great. Weirdly, so the one with the sword looks exactly like the not limited edition artwork. It's almost like if you took elements of both of them and then added flames to the sword, it is literally the artwork. Which is great to see. Yeah. Interesting that it's called a Nightmare Steed, because the Nightmares, I think, are the name of the horses from the Nighthaunt range as well, which are, slightly more ghostly, I guess, rather than this looks a bit more alive.
The Nightmare Steed was also quite a popular Magic the Gathering card back in the day. It was like a legendary rare where its power level was determined by I can't remember if it was to do with the number of zombies or the number of swamps. Either way, it was a cool card. But that is a cool mini. And sincerely, again, like the idea that you could have like I mean, obviously people like Sean, for example, already have very large kind of cavalry-based collections of Soulblight Gravelords. I'd be really interested to hear his opinion on these when we see him this weekend, because again, for him, I know he's painted a lot of Graveguard, and I know he's painted White Lords,
he's mostly painted them under your insistence because they were really good. He could have not had many, and now he could have just painted them for the first time, but you force him to paint hundreds of them, Dan.
Well, I mean 20. I don't think that's hundreds, but like, but yeah, I'd be interested to hear his perspective on it, because I think, you know, ultimately they've been quite good in the fact that they're saying you can continue using the stuff you've got, which is cool. But yeah, I'd be interested to know what his thoughts are on whether he wants this. But I can see this guy alongside those Blood Knights.
Yeah, because they're new ones as well, the Blood Knights, aren't they? Yeah, and they were great models. I love how it turns it into like a little diorama with the Death Rattle skeletons coming up from the ground on the base. That just works so well. Yeah, it's really phenomenal. It's like I just look at the whole range and I really want to get them. However, it does feel like, oh no, am I doing yet another Death Cavalry army? I don't want to do that. That's the only thing that I think that would put me off slightly. Unless I lean more into the Barrow Guard on foot, perhaps.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think at the end of the day, yeah, maybe just buy the Zombie Dragon out of the gate and enjoy it, and just add that to your, and then go from there. But yeah, as Phil's already said, the cover artwork with the flaming sword and the kind of mix of Baldy and crazy hair. Again, the incorporation of the Death Rattles and the Barrow Guard, as it were. Just, yeah, again, absolutely stunning. Really beautiful piece of artwork. Again, really evocative, really engaging, super cool. Like, really great cover. Well done them. They did also, I suppose, announce the Spearhead, which would have been Phil's earlier confusion. So in the Spearhead, there's 20 Death Rattle, 10 Barrow Guard, 5 Barrow Knights, and a White Lord on foot. So again, really, really cool Spearhead selection. I mean, theoretically, you could pick up the Spearhead, pick up the box. You'd be quite a ways towards 2,000
points. Easily, yeah, because that's a lot of points in that one.
Get those two. Get the dragon. It'll probably, if even by like GW prices, 120 for like the box set, 80 to 100 quid for this. We'll call it 80 for the sake of argument, because I can't be bothered to do complicated max. So 200 quid there, and then the dragon will probably be 120ish. So there you go. You got like a whole new AOS army for 320 quid.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. What's interesting is the White King on foot is the very old fantasy mini that literally comes on a square base. No, it does, so I'm not complaining, but it is interesting that they're replacing a White Lord or White King on Steed because it's 2 years old with a new one, but then they're keeping an old mini that's probably more like 10 years old. Well, it will be because it's fantasy, and AOS is 10 now, isn't it? Yeah, it's about that.
Yeah, it's like 9. No, it is 10. It'll be 10 this year.
So it's I assume that was a sort of 8 for Ed mini, so still in its prime.
Indeed. And then last things last is the AOS roadmap, which is telling us that obviously we just had Auric War Clans. We'll do a review of that book at some point. The broad strokes are underwhelming. Gloomspite Gits, which are around the corner, seems super exciting, but again, probably not likely to be dramatically different from what Gloomspite are currently. Soulblight Gravelords are coming around the corner, which is super cool. What's sort of weird about it is they use the terminology of the now being Soulblight Gravelords, which is evidently not true. They should really still have kind of been in the...
I mean, so that's similar to the 40k one where they were like, Krieg is now and it's like, yes, for the limited edition box, but not for the general release of anything. So it will be interesting to know when that and Soulblight Gravelords actually comes out on a sort of more general
sometime in the next 2 months. They've got to
Yeah.
get. So I assume Soulblight Gravelords are going to come out before the end of Q1 25. And then coming next is Idoneth Deepkin and then Nighthawk,
Yep,
which I'm sure you'll be
excited.
happy to hear about, Phil. So again, heavily speculating that Idoneth won't get a great deal of support. They're probably going to just get like another hero sculpt because they already have a terrain piece. As far as I'm aware, they already have a manifestation law, or do they?
That's interesting. And actually, the trend this year has been a faction train piece and manifestations if they've not already got them. Yeah, a lot of the manifestations are more generic, like, oh, it's sort of death based rather than faction based. Because actually, no, I think Nighthawk do have some, but they're just awful. And actually, that was one of my complaints is some of the manifestation laws model wise aren't that great as sculpts. Maybe they don't. Yeah, I can't think of anything.
I'm just looking now. I don't know, Deepkin. Did they have a manifestation law of their very own? No, it doesn't look like they do, actually. So they do have a terrain piece, so they'll probably just get a manifestation law and maybe like another sort of token character. And Nighthawk, again, same kind of vibe. I imagine you'll probably get a piece of faction terrain, probably a nice little ghouly graveyard of some sort.
Does a little mausoleum type graveyard thing would be nice, I think. Doesn't need to be anything else.
Well, it makes sense that, like, for the start of like their new financial year going into their kind of Q2, that these two releases can kind of get a little bit of love. I mean, again, it'd be nice that if they came along and gave a big kind of more impressive kind of monstrous miniature to Nighthawk, but that just probably isn't their archetype, which I'm okay with if that's the way it goes. And obviously you've got access to giants, you got access to dragons now, so
I wouldn't mind a redo of the Forge World miniature that was sort of aligned for them. It was like the Morghast, I want to say, and it was like a giant Nighthawk Ghoul type mini, which sort of felt very sort of thematic, basically, because obviously they are all ghosts, so why wouldn't you have like a giant ghost of some kind, or a monster that's eating people's souls or whatever it might be. That would be cool, but as we've said plenty of times, as much as I want it, it doesn't mean that's the archetype of the army and that every army should have a big central big thing, although it does seem to be a bit of a trend that every army does get a big thing, and maybe their big thing is just a black coach and that's their thing, and it's not a big monster.
I mean, the black coach is fairly big, to be fair, but not.
It's big but fragile. I would like a big, chunky, robust miniature, but also on the tabletop in terms of rules wise. Like, give me a big, scary monster to plonk down. Fair.
Well, you got a zombie dragon now.
Well, yes, I do. Yeah, that's the choice.
That's it. And then on the horizon, they've got Blades of Khorne. A strong contender for some updated minis. If we're seeing updated Graveguard, etc., very possible that we could see some new sculpts for some of the Blades of Khorne. Some of it is needed, but I mean, Blades of Khorne at the moment, they've got manifestations in their Endless Prayers, and they've also got a terrain piece already, so they're kind of well covered on those two fronts. It's just whether or not they decide to, things like their Wrathmongers and their kind of like cultist type options possibly could do with a little bit of love.
It sort of feels like it's a faction that they just don't care about, or they just maybe it's not popular enough for them to justify either redoing or caring too much about support for them.
I think it could be popular. Khorne is innately popular. Demons of Khorne, the Bloodthirsters, they're cool miniatures, man. Like, people like Khorne. I mean, even though they're not technically a particularly strong army at the moment, I see them very well represented at events. People like Bloodthirsters. People like, I've played a lot of Blades of Khorne over the last, year. KO, the Catron Overlords, again, probably get manifestation, probably just get
Well,
terrain
they won't
piece.
get manifestation because they don't do magic, but they might get some equivalent of a manifestation. It might be a
The
prayer,
endless prayers,
endless prayers, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, much like the Blades of Corn, much like the Fire Slayers. So yeah, similar kind of vibe there. And then Daughters of Cain, probably one of the most likely contenders to get considerable range refresh.
Yeah, because they teased the crone, that model
Crone,
in
yeah.
the story arc at the end of the last edition, and that was very much a brand new aesthetic for the Daughters of Cain. There's like a sort of a new sub-faction within it, much like how Death Rattle is a sub-faction of Soulblight Gravelords. So yeah, I would expect to see more of those minis this edition for them.
Yeah, I think we're going to see like the I forget what they call them in the actual thing, but like the old witches and the cavalry units. I think those are going to likely get some attention because they're
A lot
very
of them are old fantasy models, aren't they? Yeah.
yeah.
So I could see them ditching
So,
those to go to fantasy and reappear as redone AOSified minis.
yeah, and I'd love that. I'd love the idea of the kind of two sides of them. I think again, if they had like a crone based thing, and then they had the Marathi, snake lady stuff on the other side as well. And I think the two sides of it would be cool. So if you had more of a kind of crow side and a snake side, I think that'd be a really interesting juxtaposition.
Very yin and yang.
And yeah, and I'm there for it. I think that'd be super cool. And then the thing they kind of teased at the end is Chaos Dwarves, or at least it's heavily presumed that that's the case. Lord only knows what it actually is, but it's pretty heavily rumoured that it's going to be Chaos Dwarves, which would be exciting. And I think actually Chaos Dwarves could be the thing to get people to pay attention to this again in a pretty meaningful way. I think Chaos Dwarves carry such gravitas and such sort of significance that if they deliver a really beautiful range of Chaos Dwarves, you could see people double taking and thinking, "Ooh, what's going on with this AOS stuff?" Because they have the potential to be really cool. But we will see, won't we? I mean, I would assume. I don't know. I would guess you probably have mixed emotions because you've recently gone all in on Chaos Dwarves for fantasy
and Blood Bowl. And Blood Bowl.
And Blood Bowl.
Yeah,
and
so
Blood Bowl.
Chaos Dwarves is sort of like an old love that I've never actually got to purchase until recently. So yeah, an odd one, but at the same time, I don't mind. Like, I think they would be really cool and interesting. It depends which sort of aesthetic direction they go in. If it's lots of sort of artillery and sort of, much like the sort of Forge World look and feel, or even if it's like the aesthetic of the big hats from the Blood Bowl side, which are clearly the newest sort of iteration of big hat Chaos Dwarves, I think that would look very good because those models looked phenomenal. Yeah, it's interesting because obviously we've seen some, because Hashut is the god that they worship, you've seen some Hashut cultists in the form of Underworld Iron Golems, and I think some of the Warcry characters as well. Basically, you got these sort of bull-horned, helmeted minis. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see the direction that they do with them. If there's some sort of bull centaur stuff that could potentially tie in with Kragnos, or the hobgoblins, which tie in with the Crawl Boys. So there's lots of elements they could do, but yeah, if you give me lots of really cool, interesting artillery pieces, I would be quite tempted to get those as a range. So it'd be really interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I'd love to see dwarves or Chaos Dwarves lean more into those kind of war machine elements. I think that would be a super fun thing for them to kind of bring to life. I think they don't. I mean, Khazron Overlords actually have quite a good kind of war machine component to their army, which is
they're just not very good.
But they really they're not very well right now. But it's always swings and roundabouts. They've been good. They'll be good again. They just aren't right now. But I think that's the thing. Like, I love that archetype for Khazron Overlords. I think it's super fun, and I'd love to see it expressed again. And I think dwarves make sense, and I think it would be cool if, like, where the Khazron Overlords are utilizing mobility and speed to essentially, pick off things and find positions and do damage at range. I kind of like the idea of these guys just being like an icebreaker or a battering ram type thing, where it's more of a kind of brute force element where they can kind of almost establish like a really aggressive foothold. It'd be great, like the idea of having an army that could sort of establish itself as in almost like fortress type way, in the almost like towards like the middle of the board, and really kind of disrupt how people kind of play and manage things. I think it would be really cool. And again, if they lean into like certain like range mechanics, I think there could be some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I'd almost quite like them to, because obviously Caradron Overlord's like King of the Skies. Fire Slayers, King of the Volcanoes. I guess they're sort of underground and miney to an extent. But I'd almost love the Chaos Dwarves to be like King of the Ground and sort of almost have like termite drills and all sorts of sort of underground mechanics to sort of pop up from around the board, rather than just be a more traditional sort of shooting on the ground, surface level stuff.
I think the rumour was they're going quite clockworky, is what they were saying.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds awful, but I hope if they do that, they will do it well.
It'll be like TikTok from the from Return to Oz.
I mean, he's a lovely boy.
Yeah, exactly. You're just maybe that'd be brilliant. Like every one of them, every unit comes with a Dorothy that has to wind them up.
Yeah, because they did have, I think, some kind of mechanical beast, I want to say, in the Total War game, or...
maybe I didn't. I unfortunately haven't really spent much time with that.
I can't quite remember. Or there is some kind of they've got some like elemental stuff in there, and they're very magic heavy, and they're very engineer sort of heavy in terms of like infernal machines. So you might get sort of demon engine type stuff, which could be really interesting as well. I'd love to see them. Who knows when they come out? I guess sort of soon-ish, maybe, if they're teasing it. So, well, soon as in this
End
year.
of the year.
Yeah, this year for sure.
Yeah. It'll probably be by like sort of September time, but who knows. Anyway, that was AOS in all of its lovely glory. Well done on their beautiful Skelly minis, as well as obviously the incredible vampires and dragons and things. Excited to see what comes down the pipeline. But yeah, pretty solid set of reviews, I'd say. Final thoughts?
It was all phenomenal. I loved it all, and I'm struggling to not purchase it.
There we go. Transitional noise. Wow!